Alright guys, so we did a video here a few videos back on cutting a wall post. I didn't really cover much with you guys on laying one out, and I didn't really explain much in that one. I just showing you guys what I was doing. So I've got the wall post cut. I re-squared it on the mill. I finally got that squared away or figured out what was wrong with it, and it was my fault. It was a setup issue. So basically what I was getting, without trying to get too much off track, but what I was getting was 3 perfectly square sides and 1 side that was out of whack. So that's figured out now and we're good to go. So anyhow, I've already picked my reference face and I've picked my adjacent face. So this corner right here is going to be my arris. We've hounded on that enough in the last few videos. I don't need to get into all that again unless you guys need more explanation on it. So I've got my reference face and my adjacent face picked out, so everything's going to lay out from this corner right here. They are marked with triangles, and I do that all the way down. So somebody had wondered why I don't do that, but I do that, and they must have missed the one video. So anyhow, just like before, we're going to do a walk around of this beam. So right now, as we're doing our walk around, we're selecting what we want to use out of this and what's the best thing, the best sides, where to put. So what I'm looking for is large knots that are going to fall into where my joints are. I'm looking for large knots, I'm looking for grain shake, pretty much imperfections that I want to avoid. If I have a beam with grain shake, I prefer just to cut it up into firewood, because a structure like this, I really don't want it, really don't want any issues. Now the knots aren't too bad. I mean, if you're dealing with pine, a lot of your softwoods, unless you're cutting in a really old stand or a really heavily wooded stand, you're going to have knots. And you just have to decide. You got to grade the timber yourself. I'm trying to go for number 2 grade here. I did oversize a little bit to compensate for the ones that aren't. But like a knot like that, right there, that's 3 inches out of a 10-inch wide beam. I'm not too concerned about that. It's not terrible. So this one's not too bad. There's a few, but it's a wall post, so I'd rather use that, a little bit of the knottier ones in the wall posts. One like this I wouldn't want to use as a horizontal load because it's a little too knotty. So anyhow, we're going to get this laid out. So down here, I've already got it set where I wanted, where I'm starting my layout from. This is going to be the bottom of my post. We're going to come back here. This is going to be the top of my wall post, where my tenon is. Alright, so we're going to come up. So I'm going 15 feet 5 inches. It's actually going to be 14 feet 5 inches. Now, since this is the arris, again, we're going to square everything off of this side. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to square off of this side. I'm going to lay out for my tenon here. Now, so we mentioned in a previous video, we mentioned that in your horizontal timbers, your reference face points up. Well, when you're doing a vertical timber, your reference face is going to be to the outside of the building, and that is to cover your, make sure your siding and all your finish work's going to line up the way you need it to. So when you start to lay your joints out on this, and you're keeping in mind that your reference face is going to be to the outside of the building, when you're going to lay this out, what helps me is picturing how this beam is going to sit, how this post is going to stand in its final position. You've got to picture that in your head. So this is going to be to the outside. I know that my tenon layout is coming from the outside. So I know my 2.5 inches is going to be there, 2.5 inch for the tenon, and then it's going to be 5 inches to the other edge. So I'm going to measure down 2.5 from the arris onto this face. And I'm going to hit the 5 inch mark. And that's going to give me a 2.5 inch thick tenon. Alright, so I have my tenon laid out, and I laid it out from the reference face. The other side of that tenon is going to end up at 5 inches. I do not care what the measurement is past that, because from my reference face, everything's right. So I got it laid out. I'm going to connect the dots here. We've got our reference face picked out. We've got our adjacent face, and we have our arris, and it is marked. You guys probably, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a triangle there and a dark one on that side. Where that point comes together, that's the arris. Now, I know I keep hammering that home, and a lot of you are probably tired of hearing about it, but I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of you that are just looking for information, and I'm trying to make it as clear as I can for you, so make it less confusing, and if I say it enough times, you guys will start to understand what we have. Now, when I say we lay everything out from the reference face and the arris, so basically you guys saw me measure out, get the length of my the wall posts, get where the tenon's going laid out. I've got the girts laid out going in here, and that's the horizontal members that attach one vent to another on the outside wall. And so now I've got to lay out my mortises for the top plate knee braces. And so what I've done is I've got them measured where they have to go, and then from this reference face I carry that line over to the other side. So we have it here, and I have it here. All right, so on this side, I already have the footprint of that laid out. I already have the total housing is going to be 4 inches with 2 inches taken out of it for the mortise. So from my reference face, I'm going to measure down 4 inches. And that'll be where where that all comes together. I can square this out. A left-handed man in a right-handed world. Now generally I like to use a standard pencil for when I'm making my marks. I'll use, regular pencil. I do like to use a carpenter's pencil because it has HB lead in it, so it's nice and soft, makes a really dark line. But keep in mind, if you're going to use one of these, kind of try to keep just about a razor edge on that thing so you get a nice, sharp, clear, small line. The smaller the line, the more accurate your cuts. And we are going for as total accuracy as we can. And I know I keep saying that too, but that's important. So we have that laid out. Now, I'm also going to lay this brace housing out right from the reference face in the Eris as well. Now, I know I want 1/2-inch housings. I'm going to measure to 1/2 inch in on this side. But then over here, I'm about 1/16 of an inch over. I'm about 1/16 of an inch over on this beam. So I'm actually going to have a housing on this one that is 9/16. So what you're trying to do when you're laying timbers out and you're going and you're using this reference base and all that, you're trying to find this timber's inner square, as some people call it. So what we end up getting, I know if I take all my measurements, I take them all off of this Eris, I know I'm going to find that inner square. We got a nice sharp line there. Okay, if you see, let's see if I can get you these two lines here. So there's the layout for my tenon. And if we come down here, come down on the side, you can see the tenon laid out there. So we're going to come down a little bit farther. We have the start of our knee brace joinery, the housing and the mortise I have to draw in there. That's laid out there. Come over here. Come over here and I've got a start of a wall plate there. Or a girt, excuse me. And then we have our mortise for the tie beam tenon. Look at that giant knot right in the middle. That is going to be fun to deal with, but hopefully that knot goes fairly straight down, because what we'll end up doing is we'll get rid of that sucker completely. Now we have girt mortises that we have to lay out. I've already got the markings, and they are 3-foot centers. Okay. So now I know that I'm going to go with now these girts are 4x6s, so there's going to be a 2-inch tenon and a about a 3.5-inch deep mortise from the inside of the housing, not from the arris. It'll end up being a 4-inch deep mortise from the arris. So I'm going with a 2-inch. Usually most of your tenons are laid out a quarter the thickness of the member that you're cutting the tenon into. So this is a 10 by 10 wall post. The the tenon I'm cutting for this is 2.5 inches. That's a quarter the thickness of the wall post. So if I was doing say an 8 by 8, it would be a 2-inch tenon. If I'm doing a 4-inch post, it would be a 1-inch tenon. But with the beams and the girts, they're a little bit different. I go 2 inches on them because that's kind of the rule of thumb that I was seeing. That's why I'm doing it that way. Like I said before in some previous videos, I'm trying to stay with general rules of thumb just so I'm safe in my design on the building, and that way I'm not doing anything outlandish, not knowing what I'm doing, because I just don't want any issues with the frame itself down the road. I wanted obviously all this work, I wanted to stay together. Now, use our framing square. I'm going to come down 4 inches. Four inches there. So now these are going to match up on both sides. So I can go ahead and transfer my lines. I'm going to transfer my lines from the arris over to the other side of the reference base. So while I'm at it, I might as well lay out my my housings. These are going to be 1/2 inch deep housings. Again, because I'm about a 1/16 over, this side will end up being 9/16. And this side's going to be 1/2. So that may be a little confusing to some, saying why, probably wondering why I don't just come in 1/2 inch from this other edge. Why am I measuring it at the 9.5 inch mark? So, how do I explain this without butchering it? All right, so when you're designing your frames and you're cutting your timber for it, it's inevitable that you're going to have some timbers that are maybe that are larger than they should be, or maybe they're a little bit smaller than they should be. But in order for your joinery to line up right, you still need to lay it out as if. So this is like 10 inches by 10 and a 1/16. I'm still going to lay this out as if it is a 10 by 10. So I'm going to figure that my edge is actually a 1/16. I'm going to figure that my edge here is actually 1/16 of an inch back from there. I'm going to figure that edge is right at 10 inches. Period. That's the idea behind square rule framing. All right, now if I was scribing this, it'd be a little bit different, and we won't get into that today. But so because I'm doing a square rule frame, I'm measuring everything on this guy as if it's a 10 by 10. So say this was a 1/4 inch wider and it was supposed to be, I would still figure it as a 10 by 10. So I'd end up with like a 3/4 inch deep housing rather than a half. I don't know if that makes any sense. Sometimes I have trouble explaining it, but that's the whole idea of measuring off of one point where you can. And if you notice too, also, I'm also laying this out as much as I can from one side before I even turn this over. I'm laying everything I can off of the reference face. And actually every joint on here will be laid out from the reference face. I'm just doing it in such a manner that, how do I put it, folks? Doing it in such a way that every measurement, every line is lined up with the reference face and the adjacent face, everything. That's what's going to make sure that everything goes together right. If I have a beam that's out of square, and say I measured everything from this reference face, when that goes together, it's going to go together like it's square. But if you were to just cut it, without doing that, you would have joints that wouldn't line up right. You'd have gaps, and we're trying to avoid that. You're going to get gaps when the frame shrinks, but you don't want to make them any worse than they're naturally going to be. So that's why we're taking so much time on layout, and that's why I'm spending a lot of time here, the last few videos, explaining layout. Because without the layout explanations, it's really hard to cut the joints. So